"I only need 5 minutes to satisfy you," she said, her voice steady. He didn't answer, but his eyes revealed he was already lost. Now pleasure would only be the first step toward the abyss. If you enjoy love and romance stories, watch until the end. You won't regret it. Subscribe to this channel and tell us from which city you're listening to this beautiful story. Stay tuned. The Maxwell estate stood imposing atop the Blue Ridge Mountains in Aspen Heights. It wasn't merely a sumptuous construction of stone and noble wood. It was a fortress of secrets, a monument to power and solitude. Its stained glass windows, which in other times would have let light dance in joyful patterns across the imported marble floor, now seemed like opaque eyes observing anyone who approached. The garden, once vibrant, maintained a calculated beauty, as if each flower had received precise orders on where and how to grow. To the residents of the small New England town, famous for its European charm and the summer mansions of the American elite, this was merely the isolated residence of Roderick Maxwell, a man who had built an empire of luxury psychiatric clinics across the country. Widowed, reserved, and powerful, he was rarely seen in town, though his name was pronounced with a mixture of reverence and apprehension. For Helen, however, those stone walls represented much more. They were the setting where her life had been torn apart and where now she would seek to reconstruct her truth. She arrived on a misty mountain morning, typical of the region, when the fog enveloped the contours of the pines and transformed the property's entrance path into a tunnel to the unknown. She was 23 years old, with a meticulously constructed false identity, and a heart as heavy as the stones that supported the mansion. Helen Silver, her new ID card stated. In reality, she was Helen Rhodes, daughter of Constance, former private nurse to Clara Maxwell, Roderick's wife, who had succumbed to a mental breakdown 5 years prior. Constance had mysteriously disappeared 2 weeks after the incident with her employer. The official version spoke of job abandonment, of a nurse who had simply decided to leave everything behind. Unofficially, there was only silence, the same silence Helen now intended to break, infiltrating as a housekeeper into that house where time seemed suspended. "Do you have experience?" asked Mrs. Eleanor, the elderly housekeeper who was retiring after 30 years of service. "I worked for families in New York City," Helen lied with the confidence of someone who had rehearsed every detail of the charade. "I have letters of recommendation." Mrs. Eleanor adjusted her heavy-framed glasses and examined the forged papers carefully. Helen maintained an upright posture, her brown eyes fixed on the old woman's wrinkled hands. She had the physique of a young woman who had grown up with deprivations, thin but strong, with calloused hands that contradicted the refinement she tried to project. She wasn't conventionally beautiful, but there was something in her determined gaze that captured attention, an intensity that isn't learned but earned. "Dr. Maxwell is a demanding man," the housekeeper continued, returning the papers. "He likes everything in its place, nothing out of order, nothing to disturb the peace of this house. I understand perfectly." "No, child, you think you understand." Mrs. Eleanor lowered her voice as if the walls themselves could hear her. "This is no ordinary house. It has its rules, its rhythms. The doctor may seem absent, but he is always attentive, always watching." Helen swallowed hard, feeling the first tremor of doubt, but it was too late to back down. She had spent 5 years planning that moment, investigating, saving every penny of the nurse's salary she earned at a public hospital in New York City. "The East Wing remains locked," Mrs. Eleanor instructed as she led her through the interminable corridors. "No one enters there, not even to clean. The doctor keeps the keys." "The East Wing?" "That's where Mrs. Clara stayed. Since the incident, no one has entered there." Eleanor discreetly crossed herself. "Your room is here in the staff wing. You start tomorrow at 5 in the morning. The doctor's coffee is served promptly at 7. That night, alone in the simple but comfortable room, Helen opened her suitcase and took out the only personal item she had brought, a yellowed photograph of her mother, smiling beside her when she was just 15. They had been happy despite the difficulties, until Constance started working at the Maxwell estate. At first, they were just strange stories about her employer, a fragile, disturbed woman who had panic attacks and talked to invisible people. Then came the nightmares, the insomnia. Constance began to change. "Something is wrong in that house, daughter," she would say, always looking over her shoulder. "Something that shouldn't be there." The last time Helen saw her mother, Constance had handed her an old key and a note with a sequence of numbers. "If something happens to me, keep this. One day you will understand." 2 weeks later, she disappeared. The police investigated, but Roderick Maxwell's connections were too powerful. The case was filed away. Job abandonment, they said. But Helen knew her mother would never abandon her voluntarily. The first encounter with Roderick Maxwell happened the next morning when she entered the dining room carrying the breakfast tray. He was seated at the head of the immense table, reading the digital newspaper on a tablet. Helen felt her heart race but kept her hands steady. He was younger than she imagined, no more than 53 years old. The graying hair at his temples only accentuated his distinguished appearance, and his angular face with strong features seemed sculpted by an artist obsessed with perfection. "Good morning, Dr. Maxwell," she said, placing the tray on the table. He didn't respond immediately. He lowered the tablet and observed her with cold, calculating eyes, as if assessing not only her appearance but every inch of her soul. Helen felt a shiver run down her spine but held his gaze. "You're new," he finally stated, in a low, controlled voice that seemed to brook no argument. "Yes, sir." Helen Silver, replacing Mrs. Eleanor. "Eleanor was with me for 30 years, he said, pouring himself coffee. "She knew all my habits, all the rules of this house. She explained everything in detail, sir. I will do my best to maintain the standards." An almost imperceptible smile touched Roderick's lips. "I doubt she explained everything." "Helen," he replied, pronouncing her name with unsettling familiarity. "There are things in this house that even Eleanor doesn't know." His gaze swept over her again, and she felt exposed as if he could see through her disguise, through her carefully constructed lies. For a moment she thought she had made a terrible mistake coming here, that he already knew who she was and why she had come. "You may leave," he ordered, returning his attention to the tablet. "And Helen, welcome to the Maxwell estate." In the days that followed, Helen learned the mansion's meticulous routine. Roderick spent most of his time in his office, conducting his clinic's business via video conference. Sometimes he would go to New York City, where he kept an apartment and spend days away. On these occasions, the house seemed to breathe, as if his absence allowed the walls to momentarily relax. The staff was small. Besides her, there was only the driver and security guard, Julian, the cook, Mrs. Iris, and the gardener, Mr. Anthony. All had worked there for decades and seemed accustomed to the silence, to discretion. No one spoke about Clara Maxwell or about what had happened 5 years before. When Helen tried to broach the subject, the answers were evasive, the gazes averted. But the house spoke. At night, as she walked the corridors checking that everything was in order, Helen heard whispers, felt presences. She wasn't a superstitious person, but there was something about that place that defied logic. The old clock in the library, for example, which was always stopped at 5:05, no matter how many times they tried to fix it. "That's when the lady had her crisis," Iris confided one night, after a few glasses of blackberry liqueur. Since then, the clock always stops at the same time. Helen mentally noted every piece of information, every detail. She knew her chance to explore the East Wing, and perhaps discover what had really happened to her mother, would come when Roderick made one of his trips to New York City. What she didn't expect was that, before that, she would find the first note. She was tidying his room when she noticed a folded paper fallen between the bed and the nightstand. Opening it, she felt her blood run cold. "He knows who you are. Always has. Beware of mirrors." The handwriting was unmistakable, her mother's. Helen put the paper in her pocket, trembling. She looked at the dresser mirror where her reflection stared back, pale. For a second, she had the impression of seeing someone else there, someone behind her, watching. She turned abruptly. The room was empty. That night she couldn't sleep. She felt watched even with the door locked. And when she finally fell asleep, she dreamed of endless corridors, mirrors showing scenes that had never happened, and her mother urgently whispering, "Find the truth, daughter. But be careful not to become part of it." The game had begun, and Helen realized she was no longer the hunter. Perhaps she never had been. She was the prey drawn into a meticulously crafted trap. Still, she couldn't retreat. Not just for justice, but because, in some inexplicable way, she felt her destiny had always been linked to that house and to the man who inhabited it. A week after her arrival, Helen had already established a dangerous pattern with Roderick Maxwell. They weren't just employee and employer. They were two predators circling each other, measuring strengths, testing limits. Each morning when she served his coffee, she prolonged her presence a few seconds longer. Each night when she brought him the last tea, she allowed her fingers to brush lightly against his as she handed him the cup. It was a subtle, calculated game. Helen knew she needed to gain his trust, to access the house's secrets, to discover what had happened to her mother. Roderick, in turn, seemed simultaneously intrigued and cautious, as if he recognized the veiled threat she represented, but couldn't resist the temptation to draw closer. "You're not like the others," he commented one night, as Helen organized the books in his private library. "There's an intensity about you, a restlessness." She met his gaze, allowing a slight smile to touch her lips. "You are observant." "I have to be. You don't build an empire by being naive about people." Roderick rose from his armchair and approached, stopping just a few steps from her. "What do you really want, Helen Silver? Why did you choose to work in this isolated house, for a man who rarely receives visitors?" His proximity sent waves of adrenaline through Helen's body. There was something magnetic about Roderick, a presence that filled the room, the scent of sandalwood, power, and solitude. "Perhaps I'm running away," she replied, using the half-truth as a strategy. "Perhaps I need a place where no one can find me." "And from whom would you be running?" "From the past. Isn't that what we all run from in the end?" A flicker of recognition passed through Roderick's eyes. He slowly raised his hand as if to touch her face, but stopped centimeters from her skin. Helen didn't flinch. She felt the warmth of his palm so close it almost burned. "Be careful with this game you're playing, child," he whispered, his voice low and controlled, but with a note of desire he couldn't hide. "You don't know where it might lead." "5 minutes," she said, surprising herself with her audacity. "That's all. And I'll show you something no one else has ever managed." She wasn't talking about physical intimacy. She was talking about vulnerability, about breaking, even if for moments, the wall he had built around himself. Roderick retreated, an expression of surprise briefly breaking his mask of control. Helen knew at that moment that she had penetrated the first layer of defense. "Finish organizing the books," he ordered, regaining his composure. "And don't forget to clean the upper shelves. A lot of dust accumulates there." When he left the library, Helen took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. She was playing with fire and she knew it, but she had no choice. The truth about her mother and about Clara Maxwell was hidden in that house, and Roderick was the key to discovering it. That same night, as she walked the corridor leading to the East Wing, Helen noticed something she hadn't seen before. A discreet security camera positioned on the ceiling, almost invisible in the gloom. Roderick was watching her. Perhaps he had always watched her every move since she arrived. The next day she found another note, this time on her own bed. She also tried to seduce him. And you know what happened next. The handwriting was the same as the first, identical to her mother's. Helen felt a chill run down her spine. Who was leaving those notes? Could it be possible that her mother was still alive, hidden somewhere in the mansion? The idea was absurd, but in the Maxwell estate, the line between the possible and the impossible seemed too thin. Determined to find answers, Helen decided to investigate more deeply during Roderick's next absence. The opportunity arose 2 days later, when he announced he would spend the weekend in New York City for a medical conference. As soon as the car left the property gates, Helen began her plan. First, she needed to neutralize the other staff members. "Mrs. Iris," she approached the cook with a conspiratorial smile, "the doctor asked me to give you the weekend off. He said I can prepare the simple meals I need myself." "Time off?" The old woman raised her gray eyebrows, suspicious. "In 30 years I've never had time off when he traveled." "Perhaps he thinks you deserve a rest. He mentioned your grandson's birthday is this weekend." Iris's face lit up. It was true. Her only grandson would turn 5, and she had regretted not being able to be there. How did Helen know this? She had overheard a phone conversation days earlier, filing away the information for this exact moment. For Julian, Helen used another strategy. She knew from conversations with Eleanor that the driver was having an affair with a woman in town, whom he visited whenever Roderick traveled. It was enough to insinuate that she wouldn't tell anyone if he slipped away to see his lover. As for Mr. Anthony, the old gardener slept in a separate house at the back of the property and rarely entered the main mansion. With the house virtually empty, Helen had freedom to explore. She started in Roderick's office, looking for documents, records, anything related to his wife or her mother. She found little. Some cryptic medical reports about Clara's mental state, mentioning dissociative episodes and recurrent hallucinations, nothing about Constance. Frustrated, she headed to the East Wing. The main door was locked, as expected, but Helen had a plan. During her first week, she had noticed a trapdoor in the ceiling of one of the guest suite's closets, access to the attic, which theoretically extended throughout the house. If she could get into the attic, perhaps she could find a way to access the forbidden wing from above. Using a ladder, Helen reached the trapdoor and opened it with difficulty. She had to use her phone's flashlight to illuminate the cavernous, dusty space. Crawling between old beams and occasional rainwater drips, she oriented herself in the direction of what she believed to be the East Wing. The attic grew darker and more oppressive as she advanced. Cobwebs clung to her face, and once she swore she heard a rat squeak nearby. But Helen was not one to be easily intimidated. She continued, determined, until she found what appeared to be another trapdoor. With effort, she managed to open it, revealing a room below. She hesitated for a moment. She was indeed invading the forbidden area now, but she had come too far to turn back. Cautiously, she descended into the room. It was a child's room, or had been decades ago. Wallpaper with teddy bear patterns peeled from the walls. An old crib occupied the center of the space, with a Star Mobile hanging above it. Dusty toys were scattered on the floor, as if the child who played there had simply left for a moment and never returned. Helen felt a lump in her throat. She didn't know Roderick and Clara had had a child. There had never been any mention of a child in any conversation or in the few news articles she had researched about the Maxwell family. She approached the crib, noticing a picture frame lying face down on the time-yellowed mattress. As she picked it up, she almost dropped it in fright. In the photograph, a woman held a newborn baby, smiling radiantly at the camera. The woman was not Clara Maxwell. It was Constance, her mother. With trembling hands, Helen turned the photograph over, finding an inscription on the back. "My biggest mistake. My only joy. 1999. The handwriting was Roderick's, recognizable by the peculiar way he signed documents in his office. T9, the year Helen was born. The sound of a door opening startled her. Quickly, she put the photograph in her pocket and looked for a place to hide. There weren't many options in the emptied room. She opted to squeeze into the small child's closet, leaving a crack to observe. Slow, shuffling footsteps approached. They weren't Roderick's firm steps, nor those of any staff member she knew. A figure appeared in the doorway, an elderly woman with messy white hair and a faded white nightgown. Her face was marked by deep wrinkles and her eyes seemed absent, lost. "I know you're here," the woman murmured, in a hoarse voice as if she rarely used it. "I can smell you." The same smell as her. Helen held her breath, feeling her heart pound against her ribs. Who was this woman? There shouldn't be anyone in the East Wing unless... Clara? She whispered before she could stop herself. The woman turned her face toward the closet, a crooked smile forming on her dry lips. "Clara is sleeping," she replied. "Always sleeping? Did you come to wake her?" Helen didn't know what to do. If this really was Clara Maxwell, Roderick's wife, then what had happened 5 years ago hadn't been a fatal breakdown, as everyone believed. She was alive, hidden in the isolated wing of the house, apparently in a state of mental confusion. "Who are you?" Helen asked, slowly emerging from her hiding place. The woman tilted her head, examining her with almost childlike curiosity. "You are her daughter." The nurses. It wasn't a question. "You have the same eyes, the same determination. Did you know my mother? Do you know what happened to her?" A strange sound escaped the woman's lips, something between a laugh and a sob. "She wanted to free us. Me and you. But Roderick wouldn't let her." Clara, if it really was her, approached, extending a trembling hand to touch Helen's face. "He never lets anyone leave." The cold touch made Helen instinctively recoil. There was something deeply disturbing about the woman in front of her, not just her unkempt appearance, but a sense of incompleteness, as if part of her was no longer there. "Where is my mother now?" Helen insisted, fighting to keep her voice steady. Clara didn't answer. Instead, she took something from her nightgown pocket, a folded paper, and pressed it into Helen's hand. "He'll be back soon," she whispered with sudden urgency. "Always comes back sooner than expected. Always knows when someone enters here." She pointed to a corner of the ceiling where Helen noticed another small security camera. "You need to go now." Helen wanted to protest, to ask more questions, but the distant sound of a car arriving made her freeze. Roderick was back. "Go," Clara ordered, pushing her toward the trapdoor. "And don't come back. For you, for her. Don't come back." In a panic, Helen grabbed the ladder and climbed back into the attic, closing the trapdoor behind her. She crawled as fast as she could along the path she had made, now hearing the sound of the main door opening downstairs. When she finally returned to the guest suite closet and descended, she was breathless and covered in dust. She ran to her room, where she quickly undressed and got into the shower, trying to eliminate any evidence of her expedition. As the hot water washed away the dust and cobwebs, Helen tried to organize her chaotic thoughts. Clara Maxwell was alive. Her mother knew some secret that had put her life at risk. And there was the photograph, proof of some disturbing connection between her mother, Roderick, and herself. Only when she sat on the bed, already in clean clothes and damp hair, did she remember the paper Clara had given her. With trembling hands, she unfolded it. It was a page torn from a diary in Clara's elegant handwriting. "He keeps her prisoner in the Virginia clinic. Pavilion 5, room 23. But it's not her anymore, not after what he did. Beware of the tests. Beware of the drugs. He makes everyone believe we are crazy." Helen let the paper fall to the floor, stunned. Could her mother be alive? A prisoner in one of Roderick's psychiatric clinics? The idea seemed absurd, but no more absurd than Clara Maxwell, supposedly deceased, wandering like a ghost through the east wing of the mansion. The sound of footsteps in the corridor startled her. Quickly, she picked up the paper and hid it inside a book on the nightstand, along with the photograph. She adjusted her hair and took a deep breath, trying to appear natural. The door opened without warning. Roderick stood there, still wearing his travel coat, his face an unreadable mask. For a terrible moment, Helen was sure he knew, that he had seen everything through the cameras, that he had come to punish her for her intrusion. "The conference was cancelled," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "I hope I haven't interrupted your weekend plans, Helen." She swallowed hard, meeting his gaze with superhuman effort. "I had no plans, sir. Just to rest a little." His eyes swept over her, noticing her wet hair, her still slightly breathless state. "Curious," he commented, a cold smile touching his lips. "Your definition of rest seems quite energetic." There was a veiled threat in his words, an insinuation that he knew exactly what she had been doing. Helen felt the danger, as a physical presence in the room, but she also felt something else, a spark of desire in his eyes that he couldn't completely disguise. "I took a shower," she replied, letting a slight defiance color her voice. "I thought I would have the house to myself for 2 days. I thought I'd allow myself some luxuries." Roderick's gaze intensified, briefly dropping to the modest neckline of her blouse before returning to her face. "I have a proposal for you," he said, taking a step into the room and closing the door behind him. "Something that can benefit both of us." Helen felt a shiver run up her spine, half fear, half an excitement she couldn't completely deny. The game was getting more dangerous, the stakes higher, and somehow she knew she couldn't back down now, even if she wanted to. Their destinies, hers, her mother's, Roderick's, were all irrevocably intertwined. "I'm listening," she replied, raising her chin in a gesture of defiance. Roderick's smile widened, revealing perfect white teeth, like those of a predator about to strike. The door was closed, the house almost empty, and the secrets of the Maxwell family, which had remained buried for so long, were finally beginning to emerge from the shadows, bringing with them the promise of a truth that could destroy them all. "I want you to be my companion at an event in New York City next weekend," Roderick said, maintaining a calculated distance. "A charity dinner for the inauguration of my new clinic. Many important people will be there." It wasn't what Helen expected. After the tension that had built between them, she had imagined something much more intimate, more compromising. The proposal seemed almost disappointingly normal. "Companion," she repeated, letting her confusion show. "Yes, how else would you classify it?" His eyes gleamed with cold amusement. "I have no interest in making my housekeeper my mistress, if that's what you're thinking." It would be inappropriate. Helen felt her face flush with a mixture of embarrassment and indignation. I also have no interest in being your mistress. Sir, she retorted with more sharpness than she intended. Roderick tilted his head slightly as if studying her. Really? Your behavior suggests otherwise. The prolonged gazes. The accidental touches. He moved closer, stopping just a step from her. The game of seduction you've been playing since you arrived. You are a vain man, Dr. Maxwell, she countered, maintaining her composure. You interpret as seduction what is merely politeness. His laugh was brief but genuine, a sound so rare in that house that it seemed almost heretical. You're good. Helen, better than I imagined. He retreated, resuming his formal posture. The event is on Saturday. I'll have an appropriate dress bought for you. We'll leave at 4 in the afternoon. Before she could respond, he had left, closing the door softly behind him. Helen released the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The invitation to the event was unexpected, but it could be useful. An opportunity to leave the mansion, to learn more about Roderick's business, and perhaps even to investigate the clinic in Virginia mentioned in Clara's note. The days leading up to the event were tense. Helen felt Roderick's eyes following her constantly, evaluating her reactions, testing her limits. He began inviting her to dinner with him, claiming it was a waste to serve 2 separate meals when they were the only 2 in the house. The conversations during these dinners were like verbal duels, with Roderick asking seemingly innocent questions about her past, and Helen deflecting with carefully constructed half-truths. Why would someone with your intelligence choose to be a domestic employee? He asked one night, savoring an aged red wine. Not everyone has the privilege of choosing their paths, Doctor. Some of us need to follow the opportunities that appear. And what opportunity did you see in coming to work for me, isolated in this house? Helen held his gaze over the glass of wine he had insisted she accept. Peace, distance. Sometimes isolation is a small price to pay for security. Something in the way she pronounced the last word seemed to pique his interest. Roderick leaned across the table, his eyes fixed on hers. What are you running from, Helen? Or would it be more accurate to ask, from whom? For an instant she considered telling the truth, or at least part of it. Creating an emotional connection might lower his defenses. But her self-preservation instinct spoke louder. We all have our ghosts, Dr. Maxwell, she replied, averting her gaze. Some are just more persistent than others. During these days, Helen continued trying to find more information about the clinic mentioned in the note. Taking advantage of a moment alone in Roderick's office, she searched his computer, but it was protected by passwords she couldn't crack. In the physical files, she found documents related to several clinics, including one in Hot Springs in Southern Virginia, possibly the one mentioned by Clara. Meanwhile, the mysterious notes continued to appear. They will try to split you in 2, said one, found inside a book Helen hadn't even touched. Don't drink anything he offers, warned another, slipped under her door during the night. Always in her mother's handwriting, always with enigmatic warnings that increased her paranoia. And there were the dreams, or were they hallucinations? Scenes of mirrors showing not her reflection, but images of a woman very much like her being dragged down white corridors, visions of her mother in a strange room, murmuring nonsensical words. The disturbing sensation of being watched while she slept. On the morning of the event, a package was delivered to her room. Inside, a night blue silk dress, elegant and discreet yet undeniably expensive. Along with it was a handwritten note. Wear this. No jewelry. No perfume. RM. The specific instructions bothered her, as if he were dressing a doll, controlling every aspect of her appearance. When Helen descended the stairs that afternoon, wearing the dress and with her hair pulled back in a simple bun, she realized she had achieved the desired effect. Roderick, who awaited her in the entrance hall, impeccably dressed in a dark suit, was momentarily speechless. You are, he began, then composed himself. Appropriate. Shall we go? The trip to New York City was made in silence, inside the armored Mercedes driven by Julian. Helen watched the landscape gradually transform, the mountains and forests of the Blue Ridge giving way to country towns, and finally to the congested metropolis. There was something distressing about seeing so much life, so much movement, after weeks confined in the isolated mansion, as if the real world had continued without her, while she was trapped in a parallel, distorted reality, The event was held in a luxury hotel in the Upper East Side neighborhood. As they entered the ballroom decorated with orchids and crystals, Helen immediately felt curious glances directed her way. Clearly, Roderick Maxwell was not accustomed to bringing companions to social events. "Smile," he instructed, placing a possessive hand on the small of her back. "But don't talk too much. If asked, you are my personal assistant, newly hired." The sensation of his hand on her back, the first real physical contact between them, sent a shiver down Helen's spine. There was something primal and disturbing about that touch, a mixture of control and intimacy that made her uncomfortable. The next few hours were an exercise in self-control. Helen followed Roderick from group to group, smiling politely as he conversed with politicians, businessmen, and renowned doctors. Everyone treated him with a deference that bordered on fear, and all seemed intrigued by the unknown young woman beside him. "It's rare to see Roderick with a companion," commented an elegant middle-aged woman, when he momentarily stepped away to speak with a senator. "He's been almost a recluse since the incident with Clara." "Incident?" Helen asked, seizing the opportunity. The woman seemed surprised. "You don't know? I thought being his assistant—" She lowered her voice, leaning in confidentially. "Clara had a complete nervous breakdown. She tried to, harm herself and their son Theo. The child escaped unharmed, thank God, but she never recovered. She's been institutionalized in one of his clinics ever since." Helen felt her blood run cold. "Son? So Roderick and Clara did have a son, not just the baby in the abandoned room. Where would this child be now?" "That's terrible," she replied, trying to appear appropriately shocked. How long ago was this?" 5 years, more or less. Little Theo stayed with Clara's family for a while, but now he's in boarding school, I believe. Poor boy." Before Helen could ask more, Roderick returned, possessively placing his hand on her shoulder. "I see you've met Catherine," he said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I hope you weren't bothering my assistant with old gossip." Catherine blushed slightly. "Just bringing her up to speed, Roderick. You know how people talk." "Yes, I know exactly how they talk," he replied, the friendly tone barely disguising the underlying threat. "And how they usually regret it afterward." Catherine murmured an excuse and quickly moved away. Roderick squeezed Helen's shoulder hard enough to hurt her slightly. "Don't ask any more questions," he whispered in her ear. "This is not the place to satisfy your curiosity." The rest of the night passed without incident, but Helen remained alert, gathering fragments of information from conversations around her. She discovered that the new clinic being inaugurated was in Richmond, specializing in cases of severe dissociation, whatever that meant. She heard veiled references to experimental treatments, to patients who disappeared within the system, to doctors who questioned Roderick's methods, and were soon after found unable to practice due to personal problems. At midnight, Roderick announced it was time to leave. On the way to the car, he stopped, seemingly making a decision. "Change of plans," he told Julian. "We're going to my apartment. We'll spend the night here and return to Aspen Heights tomorrow." Helen felt an alarm sound inside her. This was not planned. Being alone with him, in an unknown place, away from the relative safety of the mansion, seemed too dangerous. "My back," she began, looking for an excuse. "It won't be necessary," Roderick cut her off. "The apartment has everything you'll need for one night." The apartment was on the top floor of a luxury building in Gramercy Park, with panoramic views of the city. It was spacious and elegant, but strangely impersonal, as if no one really lived there. Everything perfectly tidy. No photographs, no personal objects. "Sit down," Roderick ordered, indicating a white leather sofa in the living room. He removed his jacket and loosened his tie, heading to the bar to pour 2 whiskeys. "I think it's time we were honest with each other." Helen accepted the glass, remembering the warning in the note. Don't drink anything he offers, but refusing would be openly showing distrust. "Honesty," she repeated, swirling the amber liquid in the glass. "It's a rare virtue these days." "You are not who you say you are," he declared, sitting in the opposite armchair. "Your name is not Helen Silver. Your documents are good fakes, but fakes nonetheless. You have no experience as a housekeeper, and you are in my house with a specific purpose." She felt her heart pound but kept her face impassive. "And what would that purpose be, in your opinion?" Roderick took a sip of whiskey, watching her over the rim of the glass. To find out what happened to your mother, Constance Rhodes. The shock of hearing her mother's name pronounced by him was like a punch to the stomach. Helen almost dropped the glass, and any hope of maintaining her facade instantly crumbled. How do I know? Roderick laughed humorlessly. I always knew, Helen, from the moment you arrived. I've been waiting for you for years. She placed the untouched glass on the coffee table, her mind working frantically. If you knew who I am, why did you allow me into your house? Why continue with this game? Because we need each other. Roderick leaned forward, his eyes intense. You want answers. I want something only you can give me. What? Absolution. The word hung between them, heavy and charged. Helen felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something almost religious in the way he pronounced it, as if she were some sacred figure capable of washing away his sins. I don't understand. You will understand. Roderick stood up, heading to a bookshelf. He pulled out a thick book, revealing a safe built into the wall. After entering a combination, he removed a small carved wooden box. Your mother left this for you. She asked me to give it to you when you were ready. Helen accepted the box with trembling hands. Opening it, she found an old flash drive and a sealed letter with her name written in her mother's familiar handwriting. My mother left this with you, she asked, her voice choked with emotion and confusion. So you know where she is now? Roderick's expression hardened. Read the letter. See the contents of the flash drive. Then we'll talk. He pointed to a door in the hallway. That's an office. It has a computer you can use. I'll be here when you're done. Helen hesitated, suspicious. How do I know I can trust you? You don't, he replied simply. Just as I don't know if I can trust you. But we're here, aren't we? Trapped in this dance for 5 years, even without you knowing. It's time to see the music to the end. In the small office, Helen inserted the flash drive into the computer and carefully opened the letter, as if it might disintegrate at her touch. Her mother's handwriting, so familiar and painful to see, covered 2 pages. My dearest daughter, it began. If you are reading this, it means you have found your way back to the Maxwell estate, as I always knew you would. There are so many things I need to tell you, truths I kept hidden to protect you. First, about your origin. Roderick Maxwell is your biological father. We met when I worked as a nurse at his hospital in New York City. He was married, but Clara was institutionalized at the time, battling postpartum depression after Theo's birth. Our affair was brief, but it resulted in you. When I discovered the pregnancy, Roderick offered me money to disappear. I refused. He then offered me a job as Clara's nurse, who had returned home but never fully recovered. I accepted because I needed the work, and because something inside me wanted to remain close to him, so even knowing we would never be a family. Helen stopped reading, her breath quickening, her mind reeling from the revelation. Roderick was her father. The suspicions she had begun to develop after finding the photograph in the child's room were now confirmed in the worst possible way. She continued reading. For years, I kept my secret. You grew up without knowing the truth, and I saw Roderick only on occasional visits to the mansion to care for Clara. But 5 years ago, something changed. Clara began to improve under my care, truly improve, and in her lucidity, she realized who I was. Instead of reacting with anger, she offered me friendship. Together, we discovered something terrible. Roderick had been testing experimental drugs on her for years, keeping her in a state of mental confusion to control her fortune and protect his reputation. Drugs developed in his own clinics, drugs that altered personality, perception, identity itself. A chill ran down Helen's spine. What else was there in that twisted family? What kind of man was Roderick Maxwell, her biological father? The last lines of the letter were even more disturbing. When we confronted Roderick, he promised to stop the experiments. He lied. One night, I found Clara in a catatonic state and an empty medication bottle beside her bed. I panicked and decided to flee with you, but he discovered me. I cannot write what happened next. It's all recorded in the flash drive files. Roderick gave me 2 options, an experimental treatment in one of his clinics or permanent separation from you. I chose the second option, so that you would remain free. If I am alive when you read this, I will be where the river meets the mountain, where we promise to build our home someday. If not, do not seek revenge, daughter. Seek the truth. And then liberation. For you, for Clara, for Theo, and perhaps even for Roderick, who is also a victim of his own demons. With eternal love, your mother." Helen wiped away the tears streaming freely down her face and opened the flash drive files. They were videos, dozens of them, showing psychiatric experiments on unidentified patients, men and women in sterile rooms, responding to simple questions with increasing confusion, developing alternative personalities, forgetting who they were. In one of the videos, she recognized Clara, younger, screaming that she wasn't herself, that they had put someone else inside her head. The last video was the most disturbing. It showed her mother, sitting in a metal chair in a white room facing the camera. "My name is Constance Rhodes," she said in a monotone voice. "I voluntarily agree to participate in the Mirror Protocol. I understand that my previous identity will be suppressed and replaced. I do this to protect my daughter, Helen Rhodes, from any association with me or the Maxwell family." The camera then showed a man in a lab coat administering an injection into her arm. The man's face never appeared, but Helen recognized his voice when he said, "Protocol initiated. Subject 23. The video ended abruptly. Helen remained paralyzed before the screen, trying to process what she had seen. Her mother hadn't disappeared. She had been transformed into someone else. Her identity, her memories, everything that made her who she was, had been erased by Roderick and his experimental drugs. And he had done this to Clara too, keeping her prisoner in the east wing of the mansion, a ghost of herself. When she finally left the office, she found Roderick sitting exactly where she had left him, the empty whiskey glass in his hand. He didn't turn to look at her. "Now you know," he said simply. "Where is she?" Helen asked, her voice trembling with anger and pain. "At the Hot Springs Clinic. Under the name Mary Saint. She remembers nothing, not me, not you, not who she was. Think of it as a blessing. A blessing." Helen almost screamed. "You stole her life, her identity." "I saved both of you," he replied, finally turning to face her. "Clara had found out about you, my daughter out of wedlock. In her instability, she threatened to destroy all of us. She threatened to do to you what she tried to do to Theo. And that's why you keep her prisoner in the East Wing, drugged and confused?" A glimpse of surprise passed across Roderick's face. "So you found your way there," he stated. "Clara is not a prisoner. She is protected from herself, from the world, from the press that would destroy her if they discovered her condition. The alternative would be permanent institutionalization, and she made me promise in her lucid moments that I would never institutionalize her." He looked away. "Say a pact that torments me every day." Helen felt her head spin with the complexity of the situation. There were too many layers of lies, half-truths, and secrets to unravel. "And what is your proposal now?" she asked, crossing her arms defensively. "Why reveal all this to me?" "Because I'm tired," he replied, suddenly appearing aged and fragile. "Tired of carrying these secrets alone. Tired of living with the ghosts I created." He stood up, approaching cautiously. "I want you to meet your mother, even if she doesn't remember you. I want you to meet your half-brother Theo, and I want—" "What?" Helen pressed when he hesitated. "I want you to forgive me," Roderick completed, his voice almost a whisper. "Not for what I did. I know it's unforgivable. But for what I didn't do. For never having been a father to you. For having allowed you to grow up without knowing your origin, your family." Helen recoiled, conflicting emotions making it difficult to breathe. She had imagined many scenarios for this confrontation, but none like this, with Roderick begging not for his life or silence, but for her forgiveness. "Tomorrow we will go to Hot Springs," he continued. "You will see your mother. Afterward, you will decide what you want to do. Stay, leave, report me to the authorities. Any choice will be respected. Why would I believe you now?" Helen asked, unable to trust the man who had destroyed so many lives, including her mother's. "Because I am also your last hope of getting her back," he replied simply. "The Mirror Protocol can be reversed, not completely, but enough for her to remember you, the love she felt for you. Only I know how to do it." The words hit Helen like a physical blow. The possibility of having her mother back, even partially, was too tempting to ignore. But the price. The price was a bargain with the man who had caused all that suffering in the first place. "I'll think about it," she finally said, heading to the guest room he had indicated earlier. "I promise nothing." When she closed the door behind her, Helen felt more alone than ever. The truth she had sought so desperately now weighed on her shoulders like a slab. Roderick was her father, Clara her stepmother, Theo her half-brother, and all were trapped in a web of manipulation and secrets so intricate that even she could no longer discern where the victim ended and the tormentor began. That night, she couldn't sleep. She stared out the window at the New York City skyscrapers, as distant from her reality as the stars. Somewhere out there was her mother, no longer Constance but a woman named Mary, with false memories and a fabricated identity. And somewhere there was a boy, Theo, who shared her blood but not her history. As dawn broke over the city, Helen made her decision. She would follow Roderick to Hot Springs. She would meet Mary Saint, and then she would find a way to dismantle the empire of secrets Roderick had built, piece by piece, until the truth came to light and justice was done, not just for her mother, but for all the anonymous patients in the disturbing videos, even if it meant losing any chance of having a family again. The drive to Hot Springs was made in oppressive silence. The winter sky covered the Virginia mountains with a gray mantle, matching the mood inside the car. Helen kept her gaze fixed on the landscape speeding past the window. Coffee farms, small villages, the road winding through deep valleys. The region, famous for its mineral springs and mild climate, seemed strangely melancholic that morning. Roderick drove personally. He had dismissed Julian, claiming the matter was too delicate for witnesses. From time to time, he cast sidelong glances at Helen as if trying to guess her thoughts. She remained impassive, though inwardly she was a whirlwind of emotions, anxiety, fear, anger, and a faint, almost imperceptible hope. "You need to understand a few things before we arrive," Roderick said, finally breaking the silence when the sign indicating the entrance to Hot Springs appeared. "Mary Saint has no idea who you are. To her, her past began 5 years ago when she woke up in our clinic after a supposed accident." "What accident?" Helen asked, her voice laden with sarcasm. "A car accident that resulted in severe amnesia," he replied, ignoring her tone. "It's the official story. The clinic staff believe it. Only the chief physician knows the truth." "And what is her role now? Is she still a nurse?" Roderick nodded. "Yes, we rebuilt her identity around what she knew how to do. She works in the children's wing of the clinic. She's good with children." The irony of the situation was not lost on Helen. Her mother, deprived of memories of her own daughter, now cared for other children. "You said the process can be reversed," she reminded him. "How?" Roderick turned a corner, entering a secondary road lined with eucalyptus trees. "The mirror protocol works in layers," he explained. "It doesn't completely erase memories. It suppresses them under new mental constructs. With the right treatment, we can dismantle those constructs, allowing the original memories to resurface. But it's a delicate process, painful and irreversible once started." "And the side effects?" He hesitated, which told Helen more than any answer. Disorientation, confusion, possibly temporary psychotic episodes as the brain tries to reconcile two conflicting realities. He paused. "In some cases, permanent catatonia." Helen felt a knot form in her throat. "And you're willing to risk that with her?" "Why?" "Because you will ask it," Roderick replied simply, "and because I owe it to both of you." The Renaissance Clinic appeared after a bend, surprisingly beautiful for a psychiatric facility. Built in the colonial Virginia style, with white walls and dark wood details, it looked more like a luxury inn than a hospital. Well-maintained gardens surrounded the complex, with patients accompanied by nurses walking calmly along shaded paths. As they parked, Roderick turned to Helen. "Here you are, Helen Maxwell, my daughter," he instructed. "I recently discovered your existence, and I'm trying to build a relationship. It's the closest to the truth we can get without raising suspicion." Helen felt a chill at being referred to as his daughter so openly. "And what will we tell her?" "Mary, nothing yet. First, I want you to just observe her, see how she is now. Then we'll decide the next steps." They were met at the entrance by a middle-aged man with grey hair and a stern expression, wearing an immaculately white lab coat. "Dr. Maxwell," he greeted with deference. "We weren't expecting your visit today." "Dr. Meadows," Roderick replied. "This is my daughter, Helen. She's considering a career in psychiatry and would like to see our facilities." The doctor's eyes narrowed slightly as they landed on Helen, as if trying to place her face in some distant memory. "Your daughter?" I didn't know you had a daughter besides Theo. It's a recent discovery, Roderick replied with a tense smile. Helen grew up with her mother. We're getting to know each other now. Dr. Meadows nodded, seemingly accepting the explanation. Welcome, Miss Maxwell. It will be a pleasure to show you our clinic. The tour of the facilities was surreal. As Dr. Meadows proudly described the revolutionary treatments offered, Helen couldn't help but imagine how many of the patients were victims of the same procedure applied to her mother. How many identities had been erased, how many lives rewritten. The thought made her nauseous. The children's wing was in a separate building, surrounded by a colorful garden with toys and a small vegetable patch. When they entered, Helen immediately saw her. Mary Saint, the woman who was once Constance Rhodes, was sitting on a bench under a tree, reading a book to 3 children. She wore the clinic's light blue uniform, and her hair, which Helen remembered as long and dark, was now short and flecked with grey. But it was her smile, open, genuine, free of worries, that most shocked Helen. Her mother seemed happy. Nurse Saint is one of our greatest successes, Dr. Meadows commented, observing her as well. She arrived here completely disoriented after the accident. She remembered nothing, not even her name. We rebuilt her life step by step. And now she is one of the most beloved staff members by the patients. Helen felt tears burning her eyes and quickly turned her face so no one would notice. Does she know about her past? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. She knows she suffered a severe accident and lost her memory. She knows she has no known family. The rest, the doctor shrugged. We created a new story for her. Sometimes it's easier to start from scratch than to try to recover something irremediably lost. Roderick lightly touched Helen's arm, a gesture that might seem paternal to any observer, but which she felt as a warning. Can we talk to her? He asked Meadows. The doctor hesitated. I don't know if it's prudent. Any change in routine can be... Just a brief introduction, Roderick insisted. Helen is particularly interested in working with children. Reluctantly, Dr. Meadows agreed. They approached the bench where Mary Constance was finishing the story for the children. Seeing them, she smiled politely and stood up. Dr. Meadows, she greeted. Then, noticing Roderick, her eyes widened slightly. Dr. Maxwell? I didn't know you were visiting today. There was something in her voice, an underlying, almost imperceptible tension, that made Helen suspect that, even without knowing who Roderick was in her previous life, Mary felt some kind of instinctive reaction to his presence. Nurse Saint, Roderick replied with a professional smile. This is my daughter Helen. She's interested in our work with children. Mary's eyes Helen knew better than her own, rested on her with polite curiosity. No recognition, no spark of memory. It was like being observed by a stranger who wore her mother's face. Nice to meet you, Helen, she said, extending her hand. Helen accepted the handshake, feeling the warm, familiar hand enclose hers. How many times had that same hand dried her tears, combed her hair, held hers in moments of fear? Emotion threatened to overwhelm her. The pleasure is mine, she managed to reply, her voice almost a whisper. Something passed across Mary's face, a momentary shadow of confusion, as if trying to remember something elusive. You seem familiar, she commented, tilting her head. Have we met before? Before Helen could answer, Roderick intervened. Helen has one of those faces, he said lightly. Everyone thinks they've seen her somewhere before. The explanation seemed to satisfy Mary, who smiled again. That must be it. Well, if you want to know more about our work here, I'm available. Dr. Meadows, apparently anxious to end the interaction, suggested they continue the tour. As they walked away, Helen couldn't help but look back. Mary had returned to the bench and the children, but now seemed thoughtful, as if something was bothering her. The rest of the visit passed in a blur for Helen. She barely registered the explanations about the various treatments, the luxurious accommodations, the pride with which they spoke of their success rates. All she could think of was the woman she had seen, that stranger who carried her mother's face and body, but whose eyes held no memory of her. Back in the car, when they were finally alone, Helen broke down. Silent tears streamed down her face as she stared at her hands, still trying to feel the warmth of her mother's touch. She seems happy, she finally said. Her voice choked. Yes, Roderick agreed, without starting the engine. Free from worries, free from the burden of knowing what happened. And that justifies what you did? I'm not seeking justification, Helen, he replied, rubbing his tired face. Just stating a fact. Mary Saint is happy. Constance Rhodes lived tormented, afraid, angry, with the burden of knowing too much. About you, about your experiments, about everything. About the fact that Clara tried to harm our son, your half-brother. About the impossible love she felt for me, even knowing who I was. About the guilt of having allowed me to manipulate her, of having failed to protect Clara when she realized what was happening. Helen wiped her tears with the back of her hands. And now? What's the next step in your sick game? Roderick stared at her, his eyes reflecting a disturbing mixture of determination and vulnerability. The decision is yours. We can leave things as they are. Mary will continue her life here, caring for the children in peace. Or we can begin the reversal process. Bring Constance back with all her memories of the good and the terrible. And the third option? Helen asked. The one where I report you to the authorities for illegal experiments, kidnapping, psychological manipulation. That's also a possibility, he calmly agreed. But think of the consequences. For her, for Clara, for Theo, for all the patients who went through the protocol and now live entirely new lives. How many of them would you be willing to sacrifice in the name of justice? It was an impossible dilemma, and Helen knew it. Exposing Roderick would mean exposing everything, destroying her mother's rebuilt life, dragging Clara into public scrutiny, traumatizing a boy who was blameless for his father's sins. And the other patients, those in the videos, those who might be better off in their new identities, who was she to decide their fates? I need time, she finally said, to think, to process all of this. Understandable, Roderick replied, finally starting the car. We can go back to New York City today. Tomorrow we'll return to Aspen Heights. No, Helen replied firmly. I want to stay here, in Hot Springs. I want to observe her more, to know her as Mary, since I can't have her as Constance. Roderick studied her for a moment. This could be dangerous. If she starts having spontaneous flashbacks, it's a risk I'm willing to take. After a brief negotiation, it was agreed that Helen would stay in Hot Springs for a few days, at a small hotel near the clinic. Roderick reluctantly agreed, on the condition that Dr. Meadows be informed of the situation to monitor any changes in Mary's behavior. Don't try to force memories, he warned before leaving. The brain has powerful defense mechanisms. If pressured too much, it can shut down completely. Helen spent the next 3 days establishing a routine. Every morning, she visited the clinic under the pretext of observing therapeutic methods for her supposed career in psychiatry. She spent most of her time in the children's wing, watching Mary work with the children, occasionally exchanging a few words with her. Mary was kind, professional, slightly reserved, so different from the warm, protective mother Helen remembered. Still, there were flashes of the Constance she had known, in the way she twirled a lock of hair when concentrating, in the sound of her laughter, in the way she narrowed her eyes when she was suspicious of something. On the third day, something unexpected happened. Helen was sitting on a garden bench watching Mary lead a painting activity with the children when the nurse approached during a break. "May I sit down?" she asked, indicating the empty space next to Helen. "Of course," she replied, surprised by the initiative. Mary sat down, looking thoughtfully at the children playing in the distance. "You know, I've been having strange dreams since you arrived," she commented. Almost casually, Helen felt her heart race. "What kind of dreams?" "Dreams of a little girl," Mary smiled, a sad, distant smile. "A little girl who grows up in front of me. First she's a baby, then a child running in a park, then a teenager. It's like watching a whole life in fragments." "And how do you feel in these dreams?" Helen asked carefully. "Happy, sad, proud, scared." Mary looked directly at her. "Like a mother would feel, I imagine." The air between them seemed to vibrate with unspoken possibilities. Helen fought the urge to tell her everything, to try to force the memories out. "Did you never have children?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "Not that I know of," Mary replied with a slight shrug. "My life started 5 years ago, remember? Everything before that is a void." She paused, frowning. "But sometimes I feel like there's someone waiting for me somewhere. Someone important. Someone who needs me." Helen swallowed the lump in her throat. "Have you ever tried to find out about your past? To investigate who you were?" Mary shook her head. "The doctors advised against it. They said it could cause a setback in my treatment, that it's better to build a future than to chase a past that may never return. She sighed. Besides, if no one has come looking for me in 5 years, I assume there was no one who cared that much. The words hit Helen like a dagger. She wanted to scream that she had looked, that she had never given up, that she had moved heaven and earth to find her. But she knew she couldn't, not yet. Perhaps they didn't know where to look, she suggested delicately. Mary smiled, a resigned and somewhat melancholic smile. That's a kind thought. But I've learned to accept my new reality. Mary Saint is who I am now, and there are good things in this life. The children, my work, it's not so bad. One of the children called for the nurse, and Mary stood up. It was good talking to you. Helen, there's something about you that brings me peace, as if we've known each other for a long time. She briefly touched Helen's arm. I hope you find what you're looking for in your research. Helen watched her walk away, her heart torn between hope and despair. Her mother was there, so close she could touch her and simultaneously more distant than ever. That night in her hotel room, Helen made a decision. She picked up the phone and called Roderick. I want to try, she said as soon as he answered. I want to try to bring my mother back. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Are you sure? He finally asked. Once the process begins. I'm aware of the risks, she interrupted, but I can't leave her like this. Not when there's a chance. What if she's better off as Mary than she was as Constance? You saw how peaceful she seems now. Peaceful because she's living a lie. Helen felt anger rise. You stole everything from her. Her memories, her identity, her daughter. She has the right to choose who she wants to be. Another long silence. Very well, Roderick finally agreed. I'll be back tomorrow. We'll make the preparations with Dr. Meadows, but Helen, be prepared. The process is difficult, and the result may not be what you expect. After hanging up, Helen sat on the hotel balcony watching the lights of hot springs scattered across the valley. A peaceful town, known for its healing waters, now the stage for a battle over a woman's identity and memory. The irony was not lost on her. As she contemplated the stars appearing in the sky, Helen was seized by a terrible doubt. What if she was making the same mistake as Roderick, imposing her will on her mother's life, determining who she should be? Mary Saint seemed genuinely happy with her new life. Who was Helen to destroy that, even in the name of truth? But then she remembered her mother's words in the letter, seek the truth, and then liberation. Perhaps true liberation could only come after facing the truth, no matter how painful. Perhaps Constance needed to awaken, not just for Helen, but for herself, to reclaim her history, her identity, her choice. With this resolution in mind, Helen finally lay down, preparing for what would come the next day, the day she would try to recover her mother from the shadows of the fragmented mind in which Roderick had imprisoned her. The day she would finally face the consequences of dismantling the castle of lies that sustained not only her family, but Roderick Maxwell's entire empire. Pavilion 5 of the Renaissance Clinic had a different appearance from the others. While the other wings were designed to seem welcoming, with soft colors, comfortable furniture, and large windows, this wing had something clinical and aseptic in its structure. Narrower corridors, thicker doors, smaller windows, a silent reminder that, despite the luxurious facade, this was still a place where people were restrained and controlled. Helen waited in the antechamber of the laboratory, her body tense like a violin string about to snap. Through the half-open door, she could see Roderick and Dr. Meadows talking in low voices, consulting patient files and preparing what appeared to be a tray of medications. The process has 3 stages, Roderick had explained during the drive to the clinic. First, an inhibitor that deactivates the most recent layers of mental programming, Mary's identity. Then a stabilizer to prevent psychotic collapse during the transition. Finally, a catalyst that will help bring the original memories back to the surface. And the risks Helen had pressed. In addition to those I already mentioned, there is the danger of cognitive rejection. The brain may simply refuse to accept the original memories, perceiving them as invasive, false. In extreme cases, this can lead to a complete rupture. Neither Mary nor Constance, just fragments. Helen shivered at the memory. Was she doing the right thing? Doubt gnawed at her, but the desire to recover her mother was stronger. She needed to believe that Constance was still there, buried under layers of manipulation, waiting to be freed. The laboratory door opened completely, and Dr. Meadows gestured for her to enter. "Everything is prepared," he said, his face a professional mask that revealed none of his real thoughts about the procedure. "Nurse Saint, your mother, will be brought in a few minutes. We informed her it's a new experimental treatment for memory recovery, and she agreed to participate. Voluntarily," he added, casting a significant look at Roderick. "She doesn't know I'm her daughter?" Helen asked. "No," Roderick replied. "That revelation could cause traumatic shock even before we begin the procedure. We need to be careful. Introduce the information gradually." "Like a reverse weaning," Dr. Meadows added. "First we deactivate the current programming, then we allow the original memories to return naturally without forcing them." Helen nodded, still uncertain, still conflicted. When a young nurse brought Mary into the room, Helen's heart almost stopped. Her mother wore a simple hospital gown, her hair pulled back in a makeshift bun. She seemed nervous but determined. "Good morning," she greeted politely before noticing Helen. "Oh, you're here too. Helen, right?" "Yes," Helen replied with a smile she hoped didn't seem as forced as it felt. "I hope you don't mind my presence. Actually, it's comforting to see a familiar face, even one I've only known for a few days." Mary smiled, and for an instant, Helen glimpsed her mother in that smile. "Nurse Saint." "Please sit here," Dr. Meadows instructed, indicating a reclining chair in the center of the room. "The procedure will take a few hours. You'll need to be observed overnight." Mary nodded, sitting in the chair with the quiet obedience of someone who fully trusted the medical system around her. Helen felt a lump in her throat. This trust, was it genuine or another product of Roderick's manipulation? "What exactly does this treatment do?" Mary asked as Dr. Meadows prepared an injection. "Simply put, it's a drug-assisted memory recovery process," he explained. "The first dose will relax you and open neurological channels that may be blocked. You may experience drowsiness, temporary confusion, or disorientation. It's completely normal." Mary nodded again, extending her arm for the injection. Her eyes met Helen's briefly, and something seemed to pass between them, an instinctive recognition that transcended consciousness. "Good luck," Helen said softly. "Thank you." Mary hesitated as if she wanted to say something more, but merely smiled as the needle pierced her arm. The effects began almost immediately. Mary's body relaxed in the chair. Her eyes lost focus and her breathing became deeper and more regular. She wasn't unconscious, more in a state of deep drowsiness, like someone floating between sleep and wakefulness. "The first phase has begun," Dr. Meadows announced, monitors registering her vital signs. "Now we need to wait approximately an hour before the next dose." During that hour, Helen remained seated beside her mother, observing every breath, every subtle movement of her eyelids. Roderick kept his distance, as if fearing that his proximity might interfere with the process. "She's dreaming," Dr. Meadows commented, watching the monitors. "Intense REM activity. It's a good sign. It means the mind is processing, seeking connections." When the hour passed, they administered the second injection. That's when the first reactions began. Mary stirred in the chair, her face contorting in expressions of confusion and anguish. She murmured incomprehensible words, sometimes shaking her head as if trying to deny something. "What's happening?" Helen asked, alarmed. "The superficial layer is disintegrating," Dr. Meadows explained, his clinical voice contrasting with the disturbing scene. "She's starting to perceive inconsistencies in her fabricated memories. It's like waking from a dream and realizing the internal logic doesn't make sense." "Helen," Mary suddenly murmured, the word clear amidst the incoherent murmurs. Helen squeezed her mother's hand. "I'm here." Mary's eyes opened, unfocused, confused but searching. "My daughter," she said, her voice distant. "Where is my daughter?" Dr. Meadows and Roderick exchanged significant glances. "Faster progress than expected," Meadows commented. "The maternal bond must be particularly strong. It resisted even the deepest reprogramming." "Tell her," Roderick instructed Helen. "Gently. She's looking to anchor herself to something real." Helen leaned in, her face close to her mother's. "I am your daughter," she said softly. "I'm Helen, your Helen." Mary's eyes met hers, a flickering flame of recognition behind the confusion. "Helen," she repeated. "My girl." "But you were small." "A child." I grew up, Mom. I'm 23 now. 23. Mary frowned, fighting the fog in her mind. No, it can't be. You were 18 when... Her face contorted in anguish. What happened to me? Why can't I remember? It's time for the 3rd dose, Dr. Meadows interrupted, approaching with another syringe. This will help stabilize her during the transition. The 3rd injection seemed to calm Mary temporarily. She sank back into the chair, her eyes closed, her breathing stabilizing. But her lips continued to move silently, as if she were talking to someone invisible. The following hours were an emotional roller coaster. Mary alternated between periods of relative lucidity, when she recognized Helen and asked questions about the lost years, and disturbing episodes of confusion, where she called out for people no one knew or screamed about lying mirrors and rooms that change places. In one particularly lucid moment, her eyes fixed on Roderick, who had kept his distance for most of the procedure. You, she said, her voice surprisingly firm. You did this to me. You stole my life, my daughter. Roderick approached hesitantly, his face a mask of studied contrition. Yes, he admitted. I did, and now I'm trying to undo it. Mary laughed, a bitter, broken sound. Undo it? As if it were that simple. As if you could give back 5 years of my life with an injection. Her eyes were clearer now, more focused, more Constance, less Mary. You had an agreement with Clara. You promised never to use it on anyone else. You promised to destroy the formula. Circumstances changed, Roderick replied. Clara had found out about Helen, about you. She was unstable, threatening. Lies! Exclaimed Mary. Or was it Constance now? Clara was getting better. We were planning to escape. The 3 of us, me, her, Theo. She knew what you were doing to the patients, what you did to her for years. Helen watched the exchange with growing comprehension. The pieces were starting to fit, not in the way Roderick had told, but in a much darker pattern. Is it true? She asked Roderick. Clara didn't try to harm Theo. She didn't have a breakdown. Something shifted in his face, an almost imperceptible relaxation, as if a mask was finally slipping. Clara would never harm her son, Constance interjected before Roderick could answer. She loved him more than anything. The breakdown was fabricated, another of Roderick's manipulations. She was planning to leave him, take Theo, expose his experiments. And you helped her, Helen completed, the pieces finally falling into place. That's why he did this to you. Not to protect you, but to silence you. Dr. Meadows, who had been following the conversation with increasing discomfort, intervened. Dr. Maxwell, I think we should stop the procedure. The patient is clearly agitated, and these accusations... Continue the procedure, Roderick ordered, his voice regaining the cold authority Helen had known in the mansion. We're too close to stop now. Constance, for it was clearly her now, emerging from the shadows of Mary's identity, tried to rise from the chair, only to realize that at some point her wrists had been secured with straps. See? She said to Helen, her eyes shining with fierce clarity. He never changes. Always control, always manipulation. That's how he kept Clara prisoner for years, convincing her she was too sick to leave, too sick to raise her own child. We need to sedate her, Dr. Meadows insisted, preparing another injection. She's having a paranoid episode. No, Helen exclaimed, stepping between the doctor and her mother. It's not paranoia. It's the truth emerging. Roderick stared at her, and for the first time, Helen saw the man behind the mask of control, someone desperate, dangerous in his desperation. You don't understand what's at stake here, he said, his voice low and intense. It's not just about Constance or Clara or even you. There are powerful people involved in these treatments. Politicians, businessmen, people who wouldn't hesitate to silence all of us if they knew the process could be reversed. The mirror protocol was never just for psychiatric patients, was it? Helen asked, understanding hitting her like lightning. It was a weapon. A way to rewrite people. Reshape identities. It was a solution, Roderick corrected. For people who knew too much. For dangerous witnesses. For powerful enemies who couldn't simply disappear. Dr. Meadows seemed increasingly uncomfortable, moving slowly toward the door. I need to check on the other patients, he murmured, clearly wanting to distance himself from the incriminating conversation. Stay where you are, Roderick ordered, his voice cutting. Then to Helen. I never wanted to involve you in this. When Constance disappeared, I hoped you would simply move on. But you are like her, stubborn, determined. You didn't give up." "Of course I didn't give up," Helen replied, her anger rising. "She's my mother. The only family I had." "You had me," Roderick said, an almost pleading note in his voice. "Your father. Blood of your blood. A father who never acknowledged me. Who treated my mother as an inconvenience. A threat to be neutralized." Constance, still restrained in the chair, watched the confrontation with increasingly lucid eyes, as if each moment of conflict helped her recover more of herself. "Helen," she called softly. "Come here." Helen approached, kneeling beside the chair. Constance, even with her wrists bound, managed to stretch her fingers to touch her daughter's face. "My brave girl," she murmured. "You found me." "Always would," Helen replied, tears now flowing freely. "No matter where you were." "We need to get out of here," Constance whispered. "He'll never let us go. Not now that we know everything." Helen nodded imperceptibly, her mind racing through possible escape routes. Dr. Meadows seemed an uncertain variable, too scared to help, perhaps not committed enough to stop them. "Doctor," she said, turning to Meadows, "my mother needs water. Could you get some, please?" The doctor seemed relieved at the opportunity to leave the room, even briefly. "Of course, I'll be right back." As soon as he left, Helen moved quickly to untie the straps that held Constance to the chair. Roderick, realizing her intentions, tried to stop her, but Helen was faster. "Don't do that," he warned. "She's not stable yet. She needs more treatment, more observation." "What she needs is to be away from you," Helen retorted, helping her mother to stand. Constance swayed a little, leaning heavily on her daughter, but managed to stand. Roderick blocked the door. "I can't let you leave," he said, his voice simultaneously threatening and pleading. "Not just for myself, but for both of you. There are people who would kill to keep the Mirror Protocol a secret. The same people who paid millions to use your treatment on political enemies, on inconvenient witnesses." Helen challenged. "Don't worry, we don't intend to expose you, not yet. First, we need to ensure our safety. And Clara's," Constance added more firmly now, "and Theo's. They are victims too." A visible conflict crossed Roderick's face, the cold, calculating man battling something more human, more vulnerable. "Clara is beyond help," he finally said. "It's been too many years of treatments, manipulations. Her mind is too fragmented." "That's for us to decide after examining her properly," Constance replied with surprising firmness, for someone who had just emerged from a fabricated identity. "As for Theo, where is he? At the boarding school you mentioned at the event?" The mention of his son seemed to hit Roderick particularly hard. "Theo is safe. Away from all of this." "He doesn't know. He doesn't remember. You used the protocol on him too?" Helen asked, horrified. "A milder version," Roderick admitted, his face contorted in a mask of pain. "Just to soften the traumatic events, so he wouldn't remember what he saw that night." "What night?" Helen pressed. "The night Clara confronted your father," Constance replied, her eyes fixed on Roderick. "The night she threatened to expose him publicly if he didn't stop the experiments. The night Roderick treated her for the last time, turning her into the ghost you found in the East Wing." Roderick didn't deny it. He seemed to have given up maintaining the facade. "What do you propose, then?" he asked, addressing Helen. "Walking out the front door. And then where would you go?" "Away from here," she replied. "To a place where you can't find us." "There is no such place," he said with a grim certainty. "Not for me, not for the people I work with. You would be found in days." Constance took a step forward, surprisingly firm now. "Then give us time. A head start. And something to negotiate with if they find us." "What?" "The antidote," she replied. "The complete formula to reverse the Mirror Protocol. So I know it exists. You developed it as a precaution." A flash of surprise crossed Roderick's face. "How do you know that?" "Because I know you," Constance replied simply. "Better than you imagine. You would never create something without a way to undo it. You're too meticulous for that." Roderick hesitated, clearly calculating the risks, the possibilities. Finally, he nodded slowly. "In my office at the mansion, safe behind my father's portrait. The combination is Theo's birth date." He stepped aside, unlocking the door. "You have an hour before I activate the security protocols." Helen didn't trust him, but she also knew they didn't have many options. With Constance still recovering, they needed the head start Roderick offered. "Why?" she asked, unable to suppress the doubt. "Why help us now?" His eyes, so similar to her own she realized with a shiver, met hers with a disturbing intensity. "Because you are my daughter," he replied simply. "And because of all the terrible things I've done. What I did to your mother is what haunts me the most." Constance made a skeptical sound, but Helen noticed something in Roderick's face that made her hesitate. A genuine vulnerability. Perhaps the only real glimpse of the man behind the mask she had ever seen. "Come on," she said to Constance, supporting her as they headed for the door. "We have to be quick." As they left the room, Helen looked back one last time. Roderick remained motionless, the once imposing figure now appearing strangely diminished, like a dethroned king contemplating the ruins of his kingdom. For an instant, just an instant, Helen felt a pang of what might have been, a recognition of the blood tie that bound them, an echo of a connection that never had a chance to flourish. Then the moment passed, and she turned to the uncertain future that awaited them. She and the mother she had recovered from the shadows of Roderick's manipulation. The journey that had begun at the Maxwell estate was far from over, but for the first time in years, Helen felt something akin to hope. Not a naive hope of happy endings, but the fierce, determined hope of someone who had survived the worst and was ready to fight for what came next. "Where are we going?" Constance asked as they quickly crossed the empty corridor toward the emergency exit. "First to the mansion," Helen replied. "We need that formula. And then we need to find Clara and Theo," Constance firmly completed. "We can't leave them behind." Helen nodded, feeling the weight of the responsibility she had just taken on. It wasn't just her mother who needed to be rescued now. It was an entire family, shattered by Roderick's experiments and manipulations. A puzzle of fragmented identities that somehow she would need to help reconstruct. As they reached the exit door and felt the fresh Virginia night air on their faces, Constance squeezed her daughter's hand. "Thank you for not giving up on me," she whispered. "Never," Helen replied, with the absolute certainty of someone who had been through hell and back. "I would never give up." And together they took the first step away from the Renaissance Clinic, away from the shadows of the past, toward an uncertain future, but finally theirs to shape.